Good morning, everybody. I am the widow, Mrs. Lincoln. My real name is Judy Sinikowski, but I've been doing Mary Todd for about a good 10 years. 8 years, really, better. Um, okay, don't be nervous. On April 14th, 1865, it started out to be a really nice day, and I thought it was going to be a perfect day for my husband and I because I heard that the war was over. And that afternoon, my husband and I, we took a buggy ride, and he was very calm, and so was I. And we were discussing what we were going to do once his second term was over. And one of the things we were going to do, we were going to travel. We were going to move back to Springfield, to our home, and he was going to continue on his law practice. But that night, we ended up going to the Ford Theater to see Our American Cousin, which it was kind of my fault why we went to go see it, because originally we were supposed to go see Aladdin with our son Tad, but I wanted to go see this show. And he agreed with me. He always tried to make me happy. And during the show, my husband was shot by John Wilkes Booth in the back of his head. He did not die right away. They brought him over to the Pat Peterson house. He died the next day, April 15th at 7:22. And actually that was, April 14th was one of our second worst day. Our first worst day was when our son Willie died, when we were living in the White House. When he died, I went back to the White House and stayed in my room for many, many days. My seamstress, Mrs. Keckley, stayed right with me. I would not move out of that room. In fact, I was so disdaunted I did not participate in any of the funerals, the wakes. I did not do any of that. Actually, that was not unusual for a widow. In fact, Queen Victoria didn't even go to her husband's funeral. Even though I did not go to any of it, I made sure that he was buried at the Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, as they wanted to bury him in the middle of the city and put a big monument there. And I had told him, and along with my brother, my son Robert, that if he's not buried there, then to bring him back and have him buried in the Capitol, because there was a spot there for him. But they did what I wanted to do. I received many letters of condolences, including one from Queen Victoria, who I really didn't know her, and she didn't know me, but she knew exactly what I was going through. Before leaving the White House, I gave away a lot of Abraham's belongings. I didn't want any part of it, including a hairbrush that I gave to Elizabeth Keckley. I moved out of the White House on May 22nd with my two sons, which was Robert and Tad, Lizzie, which was Elizabeth, I called her Lizzie, and Dr. Henry and William Cook, who was the White House guard. I decided I wanted to live in Chicago. I did not want to go back to Springfield, even though they said for me to go back there. They suggested it because it was too many bad memories, because when we were living in Springfield, we had lost a son out there too, another son, and it was too much. And also the bitterness I had against where Abraham was where they wanted to bury him. And of course, I did not want to stay in Washington. Washington was not my place. My biggest fear after Abraham died was in poverty. Coming from a wealthy family, eventually my family was bankrupt, so they didn't have any money either. And my husband's pay for Congress stopped, just like that. And my fear was, because I owe a lot of money. I had bought in many, many dresses and jewelry. I hired spiritualists while we were living in the White House, so I owed them money. And my fear was, I did not want to be in poverty. And I also did not want the country to know that President Lincoln died penniless. So I tried to keep it as quiet as I could. So, but I did have a little bit of money. So what money I did have, I moved into a boarding house in Chicago. And Tad lived with me, and Robert eventually went back to law school. My son Robert and Justice Davis helped settle my estate, but it took a good 3 years before I got anything. But I did get some income of $1,500 to $1,800 per year up to then, but it had to be divided up against with Tad and Robert and myself. And Tad's was put into a trust fund, and it could only be used for him. While living in Washington, I tried to persuade some of the storekeepers to buy back some of my gowns and my jewelry that I had purchased from them, which they did. Some of them did buy, but I still owed a lot of money. I tried to influence Congress into giving me Abraham's salary for the 4-year term, but they only gave me 1-year term. With some of that salary, I did purchase a home in Chicago. I lived in there for a little while, but I could not afford to keep up with the payments. So I moved back to the Clifton house, that was the boarding house, and rented out the house to other people too. Then I went to New York City with Lizzie to try to sell some of my things, my wardrobe and jewelry. I tried to disguise myself, and as a Mrs. Keckley, I visited W.H. Brady and Company, a diamond broker in the city. Was given a little consideration until they saw the diamond ring that I was trying to sell, because inside the diamond ring was my name, so they knew who I was. After that, the diamond broker, he was very interested, Brady and his partner, trying to help me sell it. In fact, when I went back to, that's okay, come on in.
Sorry.
That's okay. Welcome. In fact, before I went back to Chicago, but I left all my belongings with him. And I specifically told him I did not want this published. I did not want the world to know about this. And I trusted him that he would not do it. But instead he decided to put it into the New York World paper, which eventually the world found out that I needed money and I was trying to sell all my things, which embarrassed my son Robert in his business affairs and his personal life, because at that time he also had a girlfriend and he was trying to get his life together. And so that embarrassed him, so that started him thinking about me. But then in 1867, Abraham's estate was settled. My sons and I each received $36,000, which that covered up the debt that I did owe to the spiritualists and whoever else I owe money to. After that, I was told that my seamstress, Elizabeth Keckley, who I trusted while living in the White House about all the personal things, and that she had wrote a book called Behind the Scenes, which told everything. She thought she was helping me out. It made things worse, to the point that I was so embarrassed that in 1868, my son Tad and I moved over to Europe, to Germany. But before we moved over there, we attended Robert's wedding, and then after that we went over to Germany. We lived in Germany, Italy, Scotland, and England. We found it was cheaper living in Europe than it was in the United States, and found many of our acquaintances living there as well. In fact, this was about the only time after Abraham's death that I was happy and was feeling very well. While living in Europe, I tried to have Congress give me a president's widow's pension. Now you talked about you getting your widow's pension. Well, my thought was, because my husband was the commander-in-chief during the Civil War, that I should be getting something too. And they kept saying, no, I couldn't get any. They weren't going to give me anything until 1870 when President Grant gave me $3,000 a year. So now whenever you hear any of the first ladies, God forbid if anything happens to the presidents, like Jackie Kennedy, when President Kennedy died, she got a widow's first lady's pension because of me. Eventually, my son Tad, he wanted to move back to the United States. He was getting homesick. So in 1871, we decided to go back. And he became very, very sick. We went back to Chicago. He became very sick. He ended up dying in July of that year from TB. Also, during that year, while I was living there, I went through the Chicago fire. So I was worried about my belongings burning up, losing all that. I always got nervous about things. I was very insecure, and I worried about a lot of things. After Tad's death, things with me mentally didn't seem right, according to my son, Robert. I started to get very nervous, insecure, which I had mentioned before, and I kept thinking about that something was going to happen to Robert, being he was my only son left. That he would be taken away from me, as well as my husband and 3 of my children. In my lifetime, I saw 3 out of my 4 children die, and my husband. So I was very nervous. I was being a mother. I was worried about him. Hello. I was also afraid of I was going to be robbed. Eventually I started learning not trusting other people. So I sold all my money in the hems of my dresses. I did that, and I wore black for the rest of my life. I also started purchasing many things by impulse, such as dresses, perfumes, and curtains. That I said all I ever wore was the black dresses after that, morning dresses. But I gave the things away. I just loved to shop, and shopping seemed to ease me a little bit, which I think women this day, that happens. Well, yeah, me personally. And I even gave some of my purchase to some of the spiritualists that I saw. I saw many, many spiritualists after that, to the point that they made me think that I saw my husband, that I saw Willie, and any of my other children. Eventually, Robert thought he needed to do something to help me protect me and my estate. So he put me on trial for insanity, which he was very successful in doing that in 1875. But I think his main reason why he did this was because he was afraid that he would not be getting any inheritance in case something happens to me. He thought he wasn't going to get any money. He did, eventually. After that, Robert and I never spoke again until I became very sick before I died. I think he felt kind of guilty what he did to me. But anyway, because of the verdict of me being insane, I was locked up at the Bellevue Place, which was a sanitarium. I did have a nice room, but to think the President Lincoln's wife was locked up, even by her own son. I mean, she didn't want to be there. She tried, people were trying to get her out. He would not help her. He wouldn't let them help her at all. I even tried to commit suicide while I was there by thought I was taking an overdose of laudanum. I don't know if you know what laudanum is. Laudanum is a liquid opium, and that was something, if you had any pains or anything, that was the medicine that they would give people. But it ended up, they were giving me sugar pills, so, I mean, the doctors knew what they were doing. Amira Blackwell, the First Lady lawyer, was able to get me out of the Bellevue Place within 4 months, although Robert tried to stop her. But she found a way to get in there and get the letters in there, because she knew I really wasn't insane, that some of the things that I was doing was normal, like worrying about my son and worried about other things, and the shopping part, it's like us being normal. I After getting out of the hospital, I moved in with my sister Elizabeth and her husband Nini Edwards. And then in 1876, I moved to Poix, France, and stayed there until 1880 when my health was starting to really deteriorate. I came back to the States and lived with the Edwards until the day I died, which was in July 26, 1882. That's it. Got any questions?
I just want to tell you, I learned so much. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew she had been put in the asylum by her son, but I didn't really realize she went to Europe so many times, to live with someone.
Well, that was one of the places that my husband and I decided that's where we wanted to go. Like, we wanted to do a lot of traveling, so I was actually doing the things he thought would be best for us. In fact, one of the places we were going to think of going was Jerusalem. That's one of the places we wanted to go.
Beautiful thought.
Any other questions?
Sounds like you went through what I would consider a normal phase of depression, but people look at it as insanity. That you pulled yourself away from society and fear you were going to lose your last child. I mean, losing one child is bad enough, but
Right.
you lost three and a husband. And
Yeah, and I did have, even, not, I did have the mood swings.
yeah, it sounds like a bipolar one.
And it was considered that as a possibility that I did have bipolar. Another thing, the insecurity had to do with when I was a young girl, when my mother passed away, my father remarried, and my stepmother was not a very nice lady to my siblings and I. She did things that she went to my youngest brother and told him that the reason why my mother died was because of him. It was all his fault. So, she would tell me that I was ugly and fat and that nobody would want me. And, there's insecurities.
Psychological.
Yes. And then when we moved to Washington, the women there would not accept me because they thought, being I was from out west, they thought Chicago was way out west, that I would not know how to keep up with the standards, and which I had to prove them wrong.
Right.
And that's the reason why I spent a lot of money while we were living in the White House, to prove those ladies.
Did you like living in the White House?
Well, I was excited about us moving in there because growing up, my father, who was a senator of Kentucky, was also friends with Henry Clay and William Henry Harrison. And Harrison was one of our presidents, and he was mentioning how great it was to be at the White House. And I thought, well, someday I would like to live there. In fact, I knew that someday I would be married to the President of the United States. And when my husband won the presidency, I said, oh, good, great. But once we got in there, everything was just totally opposite. But in the beginning, I did. But as things happened, like when we lost our son, Willie, I saw my husband. Very seldom did I see him, or he was, because of the war and stuff, so.
As far as your seamstress, did she actually make money on the book?
No, actually, she lost money on the book.
Oh.
Because because people realized that they were talking about the president's wife, and it's like, oh, this is not good. So they
didn't give her
No.
rewards for that. That's good.
no. But eventually, she became a teacher at I think at a school in Michigan, a seamstress school.
Huh?
But she did okay for
She did okay
herself.
for herself.
Yes.
And now they've actually written a book about her through this century, right? We don't have to talk about that.
Yeah, there is a book about her called Mrs. Lincoln's Seamstress.
Seamstress,
Where did you meet your husband?
I met my husband at, I moved to Springfield after I got done with all my education because I kind of wasn't allowed to come back home because of my stepmother. I did go visit, but not to live there. And my sister Elizabeth and Nini and Edwards lived in Springfield, which I lived with them. They had what you call a singles dance, and they invited all the single men and women. It was a big party. And Stephen Douglas was there, who was also interested in me, and Abraham Lincoln came in. And before that, I heard about him because he was a partner with one of my cousins, John Stewart, so I knew all about him. So I thought someday I would like to meet him anyway. And at that dance, he came up to me and he said to me, you know, Miss Todd, I've been wanting to dance with you in the worst way. And I said, okay, so I went and danced with him, and I mean, he brought me back to where I was. The women that was with me, he says, well, did he dance with you okay? He really danced with me in the worst way. He was all over my feet. So I knew how to dance, because one of the things in my at boarding school I was taught, and he's just like, well, eventually he learned. But then things started, like we started talking, and our best subject was politics. I just loved talking politics with him, because that's what I talked to with my dad, my father. And we were supposed to be married in 1840 of January, and he decided he called the wedding off because I came from a very wealthy family. He came from nothing. My family did not want me to marry him. And he thought, he kept thinking, he was getting cold feet. He got cold feet thinking that he wouldn't be able to the living, the standard. But about a year or so after, we met again and we got married. And of course, I had to learn how to do a lot of stuff, because living in Kentucky at our home, I did not have to know how to do a lot of things. The only thing I really knew how to do was sewing. I did not know how to cook. I did not know how to clean. But eventually I taught myself. And like I said, I have the mood swings, and one of the things that I did to Abraham was I chased him with a broom. And one of the reasons why I did that was because this one particular day he came in, I had just finished cleaning the house, he came in with his dirty clothes, and he brought in the muddy dog, and it went all over the place, and I said, you know. But that's how we met.
That's it.
Anything else?
No, it's a lot of information.
I was gonna say, you probably were not the only woman in life that chased her husband with a broom or a rolling pin, one or the other, especially with the mud going in the house.
No.
This is interesting. Well, let's go, guys, before I get a broom.
You do that, I got a lawyer. Times have changed.
Not really.
No,
Now's the vacuum. Thank you so much.
That was nice.
Thank you. Thank you for asking the questions.
Oh, gosh.
Thank you.
Is there a break now? Is there a lull?
Yes.